This latest prediction market scandal you're seeing, it might be one of the most alarming yet. And actually, how I heard about this situation is I saw the headline, Kalshi defends plan to bet on lives of cancer patients. And I was like, okay, that seems far-fetched, right? Like, aren't we at least 2 more years of idiocracy away from something like that? And so I start to dive into this, and what I find is that what's happening is that Kalshi is allowing people to bet on the results of clinical trials and FDA approvals. And so you're not betting on, does Sally and Gary, do they live? Right? You're not looking for death certificates, or you're doing the over-under of what they are on the pain scale, but you can bet on whether or not a drug will succeed in helping real patients live, or if it fails and those patients continue to suffer. So still monstrous to many, though you had Kalshi pitching these markets in a very different way, right? They argue that this actually brings a new level of transparency to the biotech industry, claiming that the odds of a drug's success are some of the most valuable numbers in our economy, but they're also among the least visible. And you had them citing FDA data from April, claiming that 30% of trials likely required to publicly post results had not published them. And so you have Kalshi claiming that they believe that the market will close this gap, with their CEO saying, drug development is one of the most important and most information-constrained industries on Earth. The data that determines which drugs advance and which don't is largely locked away from the people who need it most. Surfacing information is what Kalshi is for, and we are committed to doing it right. Compliance first, carefully scoped, and built for the long term. And for now, this is actually just a pilot program, and it's going to be limited to late-stage trials with closed enrollment, and Kalshi is going to require employment verification for all traders. Right? A public intelligence company called Applied Excel will provide structure to resolve each contract because results aren't always black and white. So it's essentially their job to sort through the gray areas. Right? And then according to a press release, you have example contracts including, will a phase 3 trial meet its primary endpoint in early Alzheimer's disease? And will the FDA approve a therapy for relapsed or refractory multiple myeloma? Though I will say right now that first one is not public under Kalshi's biotech section. Right? There are a ton of other FDA decisions, but it's unclear if there's going to be limited access to some parts of this pilot program. Though also, I've got to note, Kalshi is not totally alone here. Right? Polymarket, they also allow people to wager on FDA approvals, which you have people saying is similar to betting on the future of life-saving treatments and or if people live or die. And there's been a lot of backlash to all this. And you've had people like Joshua Pedersen, a humanities professor at Boston University whose 12-year-old son has cancer and is in a clinical trial right now, writing an op-ed slamming this idea, asking, how is this not just another type of death market, like markets for war or assassination, that even Kalshi says it won't abide? And actually, we reached out to him to just kind of understand this issue from his perspective, and you had him adding.
To me, it was pretty difficult to stomach, and it didn't take me too long to connect the dots that if someone were betting on my son's trial, that would mean at least, if they were betting against my trial, that would be betting kind of for his pain and suffering and increased risk. And that was pretty terrible to me.
Because the reason that his son is participating in a clinical trial is because frontline treatments didn't work. So they had to go into these uncharted waters for his care, and that is incredibly stressful. And with this, it's worth noting that as far as he knows, his son's case is not currently part of Kalshi's pilot program, and the company said that it would not allow contracts and trials exclusively enrolling minors. But in his piece for The Guardian, Pedersen noted that Kalshi's CEO has been very insistent in imagining a world in which any difference in opinion is a wagerable event, saying further, the Trump administration is going to remarkable lengths to keep the sector from being regulated. So it feels possible that my son's trial will be one of those differences in opinion all too soon. And as you have Kalshi insisting that this is for the benefit of patients, that this increases transparency, Pedersen said he just doesn't see it that way.
The logic of prediction markets is that the wisdom of the crowds is often more correct than kind of the punditocracy or the powers that be, right? But just the number of people who have an educated opinion on any given clinical trial is so small that I just can't imagine that kind of opening it up to a general betting market is going to add any sort of clarity.
Josh noting that when he's making decisions about his son's care, he consults the hospital, his care team, and the other cancer specialists. So how would anonymous strangers on the internet be more helpful? And actually, you had David Tsai, the senior director of clinical operations at Terray Therapeutics, echoing this. He has spent his career working in drug trials, and so he sat down to speak with us to note,
even these experts who have spent their entire lives developing drugs, we still need to know the results of the clinical trial to know the actual results of the drug. And the fact that the prediction markets are assuming that they can somehow inform on that, it just blows my mind.
Right, the thinking is, if people knew for certain what the results would be, there'd be no need to go through such a long and expensive process in the first place. And then on top of this, there are also major concerns that these bets could severely impact the integrity of clinical trials. Right, you would have former FDA commissioner telling the New York Times, turning loose a betting market in an ongoing randomized clinical trial really is a breach of scientific conduct. Because say prediction market odds turn against a study, people who are participating might want to drop out, which then would be a huge issue for the teams who have likely spent years trying to assemble it together.
I think that's one of our biggest concerns. Enrollment for trials already, and I don't even have enough time to go into the nuances of how difficult it is to enroll for some of these trials. but patients are flying cross country or they're moving their entire lives to participate in some of these trials because they have no other available treatments, right? Some of these are novel treatments. I'm not sure what value it's adding other than stress, anxiety, and misinformed data that a patient might go for their first visit and drop out.
Also, it could prompt patients in the middle of a treatment to make bets that are based on how they're feeling early on, even if the feeling's not indicative of the final result. Or you would side pointing out that drugs that cancer patients might take, they can cause tumor flare-ups initially, but then it dissipates and treats the cancer. The patient might not know that, so
say a patient went on it, had a really bad tumor flare because that's part of the natural treatment of the disease, and then it's starting to go down, but they see that, I feel terrible. I'm going to place a bet. I'm going to make it, I'm going to make some money off of it at the same time. And it could be all kinds of misaligned incentives here.
And so part of that is all of a sudden a whole market could shift based off of that. Other patients in the trial could see that and have that inform their choices, which then creates a very disruptive cycle. And then of course, there are major concerns not only about insider trading, but insider meddling, right? Researchers who want to wager, they could be compelled to look at data early, unblind a study, which then would reveal who's getting a treatment or a placebo, and that could introduce bias. Also, these markets could influence researchers or even people that talk about this space to spin and frame data to better match bets placed on Kalshi. And while you had Kalshi including employee verification as a means to prevent any insider trading, some fear that's just not going to be enough, especially since the stakes are so high. And so Tsai actually created a petition arguing when clinical trial results are reduced to mere gambling odds, the risk of manipulating or misrepresenting data increases significantly. This can lead to false confidence in unproven therapies or unwarranted skepticism towards legitimate innovations. And in some, they could tamper more directly, right? It takes a ton of people to run these trials, so you could see a pharmacist adjusting the infusion rates or temperatures of a drug, and that would then impact how effective the drug is. And with all this, you had Tsai noting that even if Kalshi was effectively able to block every person at every company running these trials from betting, there are still just tons of people unaccounted for with influence.
There's just a large amount of people, down to the person, a UPS courier or one of these specialized couriers that's delivering the drug. That person could let it sit outside in the heat. And these are drugs that have to be temperature controlled, have to be accurately monitored. And again, that driver is not anywhere located on our study team's manifest.
Right, and this is something that Pedersen also called out as well.
We're always there. We often have to wait a little bit longer while they mix the drugs that will go into my kid. And I'm just thinking of the number of people who are involved in that process and how it's kind of an ever-rotating crew. So I would say, I'm just guessing. There are dozens and dozens of people, if not more than that, who are directly involved in the administration of my son's trial. And I know that they're trying very hard to kind of safeguard against insider trading, but man, just the number of people that for me, it strikes me as an impossible task to do that.
Right, and we know that Kalshi's had major issues with insider trading in the past. And whenever we see those situations, I always have to remind myself, these are just the ones we know about. So you're just not seeing a lot of trust that Kalshi can actually meaningfully prevent things here. And so then, who would it fall on? And there you had Tsai saying,
the onus would probably fall on us to actually self-regulate and protect our patients and do all this paperwork. And that's, again, making more administrative burden, more lengthier timelines that people are already complaining about.
Right, this is already a time-consuming process, which frustrates patients who need immediate care, and making it longer can not only delay potential care, but it can make it even more expensive. And I think we all know that the last thing that the world needs is healthcare in this country to become even more expensive. And the list of potential complications, it just goes on and on. These markets could also influence which diseases get funded and which end up getting less attention if certain kinds of trials pull in more money. And at a time when you already have distrust in science and our medical system at a low point, it threatens to sow even more doubt. So you had some cancer patients telling the New York Times, we're literally trying to stay alive. It's not a game. The introduction of gambling into the process really creates an ethical mess. Now, again, for their part, you had Kalshi repeatedly defending itself with a spokesperson, for example, telling NPR, if you want to ban profiting from the failure of clinical trials, you would start with the stock market where the financial incentive for this type of profit is orders of magnitude larger. You also had the Trump-appointed CFTC chair defending it as a way for sick people to get a sense of future treatment costs. And then in a paper sponsored by Kalshi, the founder of 23andMe, who consulted on the rollout of this pilot, also agreed that it was helpful to patients, claiming the opportunity to have an open, transparent data set about trial probabilities is extremely promising and empowering for people. But for many, you're seeing them say, this is just so hard to buy, especially since the prediction market space, it's not exactly known for its strong moral code or service to the greater public good. People charged or fined for insider trading include former lawmakers, soldiers, and workers at major tech companies. And while we are seeing some efforts to crack down on these platforms, they're largely happening with specific states who are then also having to fight the CFTC. Right, in Washington state, a judge just barred barred most of Kalshi's operations. And over in New York, the state's investigating multiple prediction markets over their marketing practices. And actually, earlier this month, you had Governor Kathy Hochul calling Kalshi out for these specific biotech markets, writing, "There are some lines you don't cross. Turning cancer patients into a prop bet is one of them. And it's exactly why New York won't let companies like Kalshi break our laws." But at the federal level, people just don't see widespread crackdowns on these markets happening anytime soon. That's why you have places like The Hill previously putting out an op-ed arguing that generally prediction platforms highlight a major moral failing in our country, saying it's one thing to talk about the clear threat to public integrity posed by prediction markets that allow elected officials and government employees to cash in on their insider knowledge of pending policy moves, but adding it's another to think about what that kind of behavior does to the nation's cultural psyche. And adding, it's worth asking if this is the kind of world we really want to live in. What becomes of a culture where our young people are so fixated on amassing wealth that they no longer feel any social obligation to each other or the public? I would also add here that I think the rise of people throwing money at these prediction platforms and to gambling in general, it also shows how desperate people are. That the only way out of a position that's not thriving, barely surviving, is to risk it. But then also, when it comes to the drug trial specifically, you had Cy simply saying,
there's a million things you can bet on. You can bet on the weather. You can bet on, who's going to wear a red t-shirt tomorrow. Why bet on this?
And so, hey, with all this, 1, I really would love to know your thoughts and reactions to all this in those comments down below. 2, if you like me taking the time and care to deep dive on a topic that I think is really important, hit us with a like, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. And 3, because this was kind of just a piece I wanted out there on its own, be sure to check out today's DeFranco show, which will be out in a few hours. You get more than one video today, so you can be completely filled in.